information what our mission is, and then we don't necessarily go back and talk to volunteers on a regular basis or an ongoing basis about how their work is moving our mission forward or helping us meet our mission, solving the problem in our community. I'm a big believer in creating flexibility on top of a strong foundation. So we're going to talk about some of those foundation pieces as well as inviting volunteers in to help us create this foundation so that we can build a more diverse program on top of that, or a more flexible program on top of a strong foundation. If everything's ad hoc, then nobody knows exactly who's responsible for what, or when they're supposed to be there, or who they're supposed to report to, or what their responsibilities are. But if you have all those pieces in place, I can do work from home, I can do work from vacation, I can travel for my job and still be able to participate in your organization. So we're going to talk about those foundation pieces. And we're going to talk about sharing the impacts of the work that volunteers do. And we talk a lot sometimes about making that connection for the volunteer between the work that they're doing and the mission and the impact of that work on the community or on the organization. We have to make sure that we're not just sharing that with volunteers, that we're sharing that with our organization and with our community. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. It helps validate the work that volunteers do, not just for the volunteers, but for all of those stakeholders in your organization. All right, so how can we create more involvement? And this can be, depending upon the culture of your organization, can feel a little bit scary, right? Sometimes organizations feel like volunteers can only do certain kinds of work or can never do certain kinds of work. So we want to start thinking about inviting our volunteers into the organization in new ways. And one of the things, if you were with us yesterday, we were talking about maybe starting with our own department, our own program, our volunteer engagement program, and inviting volunteers into that department since we have more control over that, and modeling that kind of behavior that we'd like to see, or that kind of involvement we'd like to see in other departments or in other programs in our organization. So I talked a little bit about that foundation and a little bit about that country road model. When we start thinking about creating involvement, we want to make sure that we can see those pathways, that a volunteer can see those pathways for both training and experience. So if I really want to work in your education program and go out and talk to kids, or if I really want to do something in your organization and I see volunteers doing that, do I know how to be able to do that? Are there clear roles or documents or information on how I can get to do that? What kind of experience do I have to have? What kind of training do I have to have? Are there classes that are offered in your organization or trainings that are offered in your organization? Or do you have on-the-job checklists? So once you're able to do X, Y, and Z, then you can be a senior volunteer, or then you can qualify to lead docent led tours in the museum. Again, is that clear? Is it written down, or is it somewhere that you can find it? Or is it mysterious, or I talked before about based on longevity, right? Longevity is not always a qualification for leadership roles or for a senior position or for an opportunity in general. So we want to make sure that we are looking for, again, who's that best volunteer, and looking for other ways to recognize those volunteers that have been with us for a long time, not necessarily elevating them to leadership positions just because they've been there for a while, or allowing them to do the cool stuff because they've been there for a while. We want to make sure that new volunteers get to see that experience or get to have that experience if they want it as well. Okay, and I talked a little bit about leadership positions. Shift leaders, team leaders, whatever you call them within your organization, committee leaders. Have you thought about engaging volunteers as subject matter experts within your organization? Somebody who knows all the things about something. Training, allowing those volunteers to come in and take that expertise and train new volunteers so that they are taking either that load off you, but you're also trusting in them and saying, hey, you're so good at this. Could you put together the manual on this? Would you take a stab at writing a position description for this? Whatever those pieces are. And then again, if you were with us yesterday, we were talking about pro bono consultants, the idea of really taking a big leap forward, accomplishing something big through the work of really skilled volunteers who come in with those professional level skills and a consultant capacity. So again, this idea that we're not just going to hold volunteers in that silo and say, this is where you stay, volunteers. We're going to open it up and say, you know, this is how you can do this, or we're thinking about doing that. Do you want to participate? Flexibility. This is one of those pieces that can be a little bit tough, again, depending upon your culture, about what you believe about volunteers, what you believe about how volunteers can get involved in your organization. There's sometimes this idea that we have to make volunteers jump through hoops, that we have to make them prove themselves to be valuable to our organization or to be dedicated to our organization. We create policies that really limit who can volunteer with us because we don't feel like we can be flexible. Sometimes this comes out of history, like a historic feeling about volunteers. Sometimes this comes from our leadership. But the more that we can think about creating flexibility, the more opportunities we have to bring in a variety of volunteers, bring in volunteers with different skill sets, and that we don't have to say no to volunteers who aren't able to fit into the buckets that we have available for them now. So more and more, what we know here at Volunteer Mesh, when we talk to those 7 million volunteers that want to get involved, is that they are looking for something that fits within their life as it is now. You know, we all sort of talk about the silent generation and the volunteers who just would come and do what they were supposed to do and you know, show up at 1 o'clock on every Wednesday from now until the end of time. And we know that that's not actually the case in a lot of ways. It's sort of that nostalgia for something that wasn't ever really a situation. We still will probably have those volunteers that are able to make that kind of commitment and want to make that kind of commitment. But we see even with, you know, the silent generation now, and certainly boomers and all the generations that come after, they're looking for a flexible opportunity that's going to fit in with the life that they have now. And I think about my mom, who's in the silent generation. You know, they're traveling all over. They have grandkids. They don't want to be forced into this kind of time commitment. So we have to be able to allow our volunteers to become more involved with our organization, allow for growth within our organization, but also allow for retraction, so that we say, that's great, you know, you're going to go on vacation, you know, if you're going to, you know, go spend 6 months with your new grandchild, what about writing some blog articles for us? Or what if I sent you with the position descriptions for these 4 opportunities? Would you be able to edit them and give me some feedback when you have some downtime, or maybe on the airplane? I mean, everybody travels now with their iPads and their netbooks, and so it's really easy for volunteers to take some of that work with them. So, you know, you can really start to think about diversifying the level of commitment without saying that just because you don't, you know, just because you can't be here every Wednesday at 1 doesn't mean that you're not dedicated. So we talked about project-based opportunities, virtual opportunities, this idea that if something has to change in your volunteer's life, they don't have to leave your organization. We talked about this as well, right, bringing those positions into your volunteer engagement program so that you are not on that hamster wheel, that you are, you know, delegating that work to volunteers. Volunteers know probably better than almost anyone else in your organization what work they do, so empower them to sort of create that foundation, document it, train, screen, bring in that flexibility, again, into your program so that you're modeling that behavior and that engagement. At the beginning, I said sometimes we talk about our mission during orientation, and then that's the last time that a volunteer ever hears about it. We also, again, sometimes put our volunteers in these silos, and we hope that they will get out of that silo, and we're pretty sure no information is getting into that silo. So what I would encourage you to do is break down that silo, really invite volunteers in, help them understand, keep them informed. Don't, if you're having conversations in your organization about theories or policies or ideas that are affecting your impact area, don't leave your volunteers out of those conversations. Again, certainly within volunteer engagement programs, you should be talking about new policies or practices, projects, things that are going on so that people have an idea. They feel like they're part of your organization. When we talk to so many organizations, they say that volunteers are necessary to deliver their mission to the community. But when we start digging into that, we find that not very many organizations invite volunteers in a way that really allows them to be those partners that we depend on. We tend to keep them isolated. We tend to keep them in the dark, again, for whatever reason within our organization culture, or it's just we hadn't thought of that before. But make sure you're inviting those volunteers in and having those conversations, sharing those milestones in your organization. I talked about sharing the work that the volunteer has done and not just sharing that with the volunteers. I think we talk a lot about not just saying this many volunteers for this many hours equals this much dollars of donated time. We really want to try to connect that work that the volunteer has done to the impact, right? Because we were here, we were able to feed this many people, and that means that those people know where their next meal is coming from. They've had a hot meal today, or we sent this many people home with food, or we read to this many kids today, or this many kids, scores have increased because of tutoring, so that we're really trying to connect those dots. As much as possible, again, including clients in that thank you message so that volunteers are better understanding that impact of the work that they're doing, that the human face, or in some cases the animal or environmental face or community face of the work that you're doing. What does it mean to the kids that come to the playground that they now have a cleaned up playground and new trees have been planted? Do you say to volunteers, don't forget next time you drive by this park to remember all the hard work that you did here and see the people enjoying those trees, or seeing those kids playing on that slide that you guys put up? So again, connecting that work back to the mission and back to your clients. And then we talked about this a little bit as well, to share that both internally and externally so that we're not just saying thank you to volunteers, and we're not just saying thank you to volunteers in front of other volunteers at our annual brunch, but that we're talking about the work that volunteers do in our organization, within our organization and outside of our organization, particularly using social media. It is so easy now to thank your volunteers in front of your whole community, putting it up on Facebook and allowing those organic connections to happen, and allowing those volunteers to share with their friends and family, oh, look, I was part of this park cleanup. They want to share that, and that makes it really, really easy to do. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating the connection and really inviting volunteers into your organization in a way that allows them to really feel like they can take that message and that understanding back out into the community and really become advocates for the work that you're doing. But before we do that, I just wanted to see if we had any questions.
We actually don't have any questions right now. But we are asking, I am asking on Twitter, if anyone has any tips or anything that's worked for your program, feel free to share it. We've got one mention from Glenn Ross who says, thank you notes are a forgotten resource. Solicit them from your clients and share them with volunteers. So again, use that hashtag VMLearn to get a shout out in our webinar today.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We talked about that in the session we did on Tuesday, especially when you can incorporate staff or clients into that thank you, into that recognition. I wanted to tell a quick story, and last year we talked about social media, and had a connection with a woman who works down in Southern California, and she had this idea. I said, think about sharing those thank yous on Facebook, and she reached out to me and said, I had this idea I should put my pictures from the annual brunch up on Facebook, and this really, it was really amazing. It took 5 minutes. I walked across the office, talked to our marketing and communications director. She put the photos up, and within a couple of minutes, volunteers were saying, oh, thanks, I love volunteering with you, and staff people were saying, oh, that's Sally, she's the best volunteer I've ever had, and it created this organic recognition event where she really just thought she was putting photos up, and she said, I saw her again this summer, and we were chatting, and she said, I have to tell you, I followed up she followed up with me and said, you know, this year we had such great success with that last year, just by sort of by mistake, that they, for Volunteer Week, this for April, which has National Volunteer Recognition Week in it, they did a volunteer of the day every day. They would put up a photo of a volunteer and talk a little bit about who they were and what they did. And she had an intern create all this, interview all the volunteers and take their photos. Everything was ready to go. And she said it was amazing. Everyone was so excited, and they were sharing it, and staff was getting involved. And so I think it's a really good example. Thank you notes are awesome, but just don't forget that so many of us spend so much of our life communicating on social media, and it can be really powerful for your volunteers as well. It's an easy way to engage staff. It doesn't feel as uncomfortable or as stilted. It can really be genuine and authentic. All right. So what we want to think about when we invite volunteers in is this idea that hopefully our volunteers are having this amazing experience with us. And we want to invite them to share that experience with others in the community, people they know, people they work with, their friends, their family, or just people they run into. So particularly when we work in an area, if you're working in an area where you have direct service to clients, or you have volunteers out there on the front line, and you're solving a problem in your community, hunger, homelessness, literacy, these are all things that people really want to care about and they want to understand. So we want to make sure that our volunteers are armed with this information, that we didn't just tell them our mission statement at the very beginning and never connect the work that they're doing to the needs in the community or the mission of our organization. That we're sharing with them what the major accomplishments are, where the funding comes from. Sometimes we want to put volunteers in, again, in that silo and not let that information get in. But the more that we invite volunteers in, the more we find these connections, these community connectors. Oh, I didn't know that you were trying to get funding from the XYZ Corporation. My husband is a manager at the XYZ Corporation. So the more that we talk about this, the more we can help give volunteers the opportunity to help us in other ways. Again, with that idea of sort of keeping volunteers in their little separate cul-de-sacs or trying to keep them in these buckets, maybe they have a friend or a family member or a colleague who would be a really great volunteer in another program in our organization or have skills to contribute as a pro bono consultant. But if we don't talk to our volunteer corps about those other programs, those other opportunities, those other things that volunteers are doing, that information sort of gets stuck. The more we share, again, social media being cheap and easy, and just say, hey, you know, just FYI, we're thinking about doing this, or do you know somebody who has this kind of skills or experience or connection? The more we ask and the more we talk about it, just as sort of an FYI, like, I just wanted you to know we're doing this, as opposed to, you know, we're doing this and we need your help and we're going to fail if we don't get 17 more volunteers. That idea of just sort of inviting people in and saying, hey, you care about this part, I wanted to tell you about this part too. And then again, empowering them to spread that word. Sending that information out through social media and asking for those connections or asking people to share that or spread the word. Lots of times we don't empower our volunteers with that information and with the opportunity to go out and turn them into advocates. The more we share with them, people want to tell people about the things that they care about. That's why they come to us, because they care about the things that we're doing. They want to spend time with people who care about things that they care about. They want to find something that they're passionate about. And if we can harness that passion and send them out into the world, into their world to share that, it can be really powerful. And I know sometimes there's people feel like you know, just retweeting or liking something or participating on Facebook isn't really volunteering. It's sort of that, we hear the term slacktivism a lot. But you never know how that's going to turn into an opportunity for someone to get involved. Somebody who likes something on Facebook or comments on something that you write maybe is just getting up that courage or trying to figure out how to be a volunteer, you need to give them that soft opening sometimes. Not everyone's ready to jump right in, again, because of their lives are busy. There's this expectation that I'm going to have to show up at 1 o'clock on Wednesday for the rest of my life, and I can't do that. So the more we talk about how volunteers can get involved, what volunteers are doing, not just that traditional engagement, the more we can maybe turn some of those people who feel like, you may feel like, or your organization may feel like, are just giving lip service to the cause into real volunteers. And who's to say that writing a letter to your congressman or spreading the word online or writing a blog article or tweeting about something isn't actually taking action, because it can have amazing results, really powerful results. And do you know which of your volunteers are also donors? Sometimes in organizations, these are two separate databases. They never come together. What you want to do is not necessarily, allow your development department to think of your volunteers as another cash cow, but imagine working together to create these really targeted communications going out to volunteers who are also donors. As a volunteer and a donor at many organizations, when I get that generic letter that says, it's time to give, and I think I was just in a committee meeting, or I was just doing this, or there's no connection, and it feels disconnected. So even if it's a handwritten note at the bottom of that letter from you saying, we love seeing you, and thank you for all your help, and I so appreciate that you also donate financially, whatever that is, putting those pieces together. If you're concerned about this, or if this feels scary to you, or it's not something you've done in the past, think about asking your volunteers to donate to your volunteer engagement program. Do you need new education kits? Do you need additional funds for background checks, for scholarships, for new volunteers? Could everybody use a new T-shirt? Do you need a new coffee maker in your break room? That's another way to invite volunteers and empower them to not just give of their time, but to give of their money. So, particularly in the areas in which they're passionate and things that really directly affect their ability to work with you or how they want to work with you. So, don't hesitate there. It can almost feel like a little bit of an honor. And we also, I think we've sent this out before, Matt, we had a former board member, a previous board member, who's a professor at Stanford, and she did a really interesting social study on asking volunteers. She had two scenarios, one where she asked people to donate, and then she asked just donate, and then she had another scenario where she asked people to give their time and talent first, and no matter what the answer was, yes or no, then she asked them to donate money. And the people who were asked if they could give their time and talent first were not only more likely to donate, they were more likely to donate more, and I want to say it's like 10 times more. So yeah, so it was an open box. How much would you donate? And instead of saying $5, they would say $50. So there really is this connection. These volunteers are giving you their time, which is far more valuable than money for so many of us. So really think about turning that into a connection. All right. So how do we go about evolving our programs? We've laid out some groundwork. We've gotten some big ideas going. What can you do when you get off this call, go back to your desk, and start thinking about this? You really need to know where you're going. Sometimes we just keep running on that hamster wheel. I talked about that today, as fast as we can, and we're going nowhere. Do you have a 3-year or a 5-year plan? We're going to be talking about this in September. We're going to be talking about creating a strategic plan, talking to leadership management to get them on board, incorporating strategic plans for your organization, for your department, into the strategic plan for your organization. The key here is we have to figure out what our volunteer program is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years so that we can start moving towards that with policies, with communications, with trainings. If you look at your volunteer engagement program, you look at your volunteer core, and the average age of your volunteers are 75, 80, 85. Some of you are out there, I know. What's that program going to look like in 5 years? You have to start thinking about what younger generations want, what diverse volunteer populations want, working people, people who work and have kids, people who are retired but don't want to be tied to their house, all of those pieces, high school students, college students. think about what kind of a program you have now. What does it look like? What does it feel like to volunteers? And again, tying into that strategic plan, what do you want it to look like? How do you want it to feel to volunteers? If you're not sure, ask your volunteers. What do you wish you could do? Where do your volunteers drop out? Sometimes, again, it feels like volunteers have an expiration date. They come for 3 months, particularly if we're in that cul-de-sac model, and they reach the top of that learning curve, and they don't feel challenged, and they don't feel like they're actually contributing because we haven't done a good job of connecting that back to impact and back to our mission, and we don't ever talk to them, and then they leave because they have better things to do with their time. You haven't created that connection. So if you do have volunteers that are leaving, ask them. If they've been gone a year, maybe they don't remember why they needed to go or what wasn't working for them. But as they start to matriculate out, say, what do you wish you'd known before you started, or what would you wish was different? What did you think you were going to be able to do that you weren't able to do? And then asking those current volunteers what they're proud of, what they like, what they enjoy, what brings them to your organization, and then what are the parts that they don't understand, or I don't know why I like this, or I always wish I could do that, but I didn't know who to ask, or there didn't seem an easy way to do it. So again, putting those pieces into place and asking, and then trying to fix them, and that oftentimes has to be your first step. It's sort of figuring out what the program is now, why are volunteers dropping out, what are the really positive aspects of things that you're doing well, and what are some of those things that could be challenges or goals, and then putting that together into a strategic program. And not doing this alone, right? I talk about this all the time too. If you've gone into your office and come out with a policies and procedures manual, a strategic plan, whatever it is, you're already sort of doing it wrong. You really need to invite those volunteers in, invite other stakeholders within your organization in. It's going to take a long time. This isn't something you can do in a summer. This isn't something that just comes together in a couple of weeks. This is really, you're talking about long-term change in your program and really figuring out where you want to go and what you want to do. But you don't have to do this by yourself, and the more that you invite those volunteers in, like we were talking about, asking them to document the work that they do, asking them to be subject matter experts, asking them to come in and help you screen and train those volunteers that are going to help them be able to do their job more effectively, more efficiently, donate to those programs or to those causes, the more you'll find that you have this team or this cadre of volunteers who want your program to succeed because they're invested in changing it. And that's where we see some of this, the conflict, right? Is if we haven't invested volunteers in the change, then they just dig their heels in and really start to push back on us, which if we've gone into our office and come out with a strategic plan, we kind of deserve, right? All right. Sometimes there are starting points or pathways that feel easier or seem like the right place to start. Don't jump into a strategic plan if you don't know how things fit together now. Sometimes the easiest thing to do, the easiest way to start is to look at what you're doing now and figure out where those gaps are or figure out where those bottlenecks are and figure out how everything fits together. So maybe that's position descriptions, putting those training pathways or on-the-job checklists in place. So you can say, you know what, we really could have volunteers taking on this leadership role or taking over this work, but we need to figure out who would be that right volunteer. How long do you need to have been here? Are there certain skills or experiences you need to have had in our organization or outside of our organization to be the right volunteer for this position? Really creating that flexibility, right? That figuring out where those places where volunteers felt stifled or felt like they weren't being properly utilized or they felt like their time wasn't being valued or respected. And we are all guilty of that. As much as we all try to be, even the best volunteer program manager out there still can drop the ball sometimes or get overwhelmed, and so we really need to make sure that we are doing the best that we can for our volunteers. Really thinking about your organization culture and that rigidity, the idea that volunteers have to do this or have to jump through these hoops, or they have to prove that they are dedicated to your organization. Where does that come from? Does it come from you? Sometimes we are the keepers of the way things are because we like it the way it is, but that isn't necessarily sustainable in the long term, and we need to be those professionals, and we need to look inward and say, am I holding my volunteer program back? Organizational leadership, right? This idea that, well, we can't trust volunteers with that, or volunteers are really important, but I don't know what they do. So that can be pervasive in your culture. The past, this idea that sometimes, particularly with organizations that have grown out of grassroots, we have volunteers, a volunteer, a group of volunteers for whom power was wrestled away from as the organization became more structured. There was pushback, and it was probably done behind closed doors, and nobody talked to anybody else. And so, well, we can't let volunteers do that because that one time they got really angry, or this one thing happened, or risk. Risk is a big one. What if something bad happens? There also can be those perceived ideas about volunteers. Well, volunteers aren't dependable. Volunteers aren't trustworthy. Just because you need flexibility doesn't mean that you're not dependable. So we want to try to switch that. And I think that that's coming slowly, particularly as we look at just sort of the workplace in general, this idea of you don't have to be at your desk to do your job. If I can do this in 20 minutes, why would I be here for an hour? And that's becoming more common in sort of the workplace, and I think volunteers expect that as well. Don't ask me to come in and sit around if you only have 20 minutes of work for me to do. All right, and then really thinking about creating that communication plan to turn volunteers into advocates. What can you share? What are you sharing now? What's something that, do you invite your volunteers to staff meetings? Do you have town halls for volunteers? Do you have leadership team meetings where all those shift leaders get together? And it doesn't have to be in person anymore. It's so easy to do something like a Google Hangout and all get together and talk and share and get up to date, record it, make it available in a scenario like this where you can be at home or you can be across the country and still share that information. And really think about what's going to be compelling, what's going to be powerful. All right, Matt, do we have any questions or thoughts? Or
we are good.
We're good. Okay, well, we're pushing towards the end here, so maybe we'll end it early if there aren't anything to share. Usually we get some good conversation going with this.
Right. I'm getting a lot of good feedback on Twitter, actually, from the engagement plan. So
fabulous.
If you guys have any questions about the engagement plan, send those my way, and maybe we can get a good discussion going at the end of the session.
Great. Yeah, and it's starting to be much more, I know a lot of people who are talking about it, and I know a few organizations that have done it. So it's definitely working its way to the top. I think it might be this year's hot topic. But it's so important, especially, again, when we think about looking at what our volunteer engagement program is going to look like in 5 years. Do we have youth volunteers, young adult volunteers, established adult volunteers, older adult volunteers? What kinds of flexibility and diversity are we offering, and who are we bringing in? All right, so I'm going to leave you with some ideas to think about before hopefully you can get back on with this process. And again, if you think of something or if you're looking for more information, please do let us know. You don't have to change everything, and you don't have to change everything right now. The imperative is not necessarily to change everything. The imperative is to figure out where those priorities are, where those critical positions or places are. If you do have an average age of your volunteers that are 80, you maybe have more of an imperative than somebody who's looking at just diversifying what it means to be a volunteer in your organization. Again, thinking about those pathways, documenting what you have. Sometimes what we need to do is where change is the norm, where we have new policies, new procedures, new information, new positions, new volunteers coming in at such a rate where change is normal, so that we don't get that pushback. We don't get that everyone's freaking out because one thing has changed. And we need to move slowly. We need to think critically about how we want to make these changes. Again, if you go into your office and come out with a plan and then expect everyone to follow it, you're are we doing it wrong? You have to get buy-in. You have to talk to the volunteers. You have to talk to paid staff. Everybody has to understand why these changes are necessary and how we're going to get there. Don't do this all by yourself. Really, volunteers are going to tell you what they want to do, what they like and what they don't like, most often what they don't like about your program. And it's really about inviting those volunteers to come in and letting go of all that control that some of us hold on to so much. Really delegating the tasks, but not the responsibilities. You don't have to do everything. You do not have to be on the hamster wheel. There are really great examples and really great models of organizations out there. And when I do these kinds of sessions in person, one of the questions I ask at the very beginning is, who is here from an all-volunteer-run organization? We forget that there are organizations out there that are all run by volunteers that are doing amazing work. I was doing a session similar to this just at the national conference in June, and a gentleman raised his hand and said, people forget that there are entire fire departments run by volunteers. If you trust a volunteer to come and put out your burning house, why wouldn't you trust a volunteer to enter information into your database or talk to your clients or build you a website? You know, if you screen volunteers and train volunteers and find those volunteers for whom the work that you're asking them to do is meaningful, it falls into place. And it's not easy. I'm not suggesting that at all, but it doesn't have to be as hard as we make it. Look at those volunteers who get it, those ones that really you couldn't run your program without, that you depend on, and invite them to take the lead, invite them to participate, you know, invite them in and say, hey, you know, you do such a great job of on-the-job training. I would love to talk to you about maybe putting a curriculum together or helping me with some of this classroom training or putting together a manual. And that is one of those amazing opportunities for recognition and for retention. When you go to someone and say, you are awesome at what you do here, and I want to take advantage of that, and I trust you, and I respect you, and will you help me? Because it's about, you know, taking advantage of all of those great things that the volunteer brings to your organization and empowering them. And then share this, of course. You want to make sure that you're talking about these milestones, these successes, as this change happens, as you start to put these pieces in place, that you're talking about it. This is why we're doing this, and this is where we're hoping to get to. And then when you get there, we've got new training pathways. We've got on-the-job checklists. I've created a team of volunteers who are shadowing, who are doing this, who are doing that, and making sure you're sharing that with your manager, with organization leadership, whether that's board chairs, executive directors, all of the coworkers that you have, program managers, and then of course, right, we're drawing this back to volunteers, that we're sharing with them all the great work that they're doing and not just keeping it to that annual brunch. All right. Thoughts, questions, ideas?
A lot.
Oh, good. You gotta be careful what you ask for.
Right. So a lot of people are really interested in specific places where they can go to get the examples. A lot of people are asking about that. So that might be something we can talk about offline.
Yeah.
So if you guys who want specific examples, Jennifer's going to leave you with her contact info. And just why don't you email us or just respond to your GoToMeeting emails, and all of those will come to us. And we can just continue this conversation offline because it might be a little bit extensive.
Yeah, and we don't really have case studies, but if you email me, if you'd like to talk to someone who's engaging volunteers in their volunteer engagement program, if you want to send me your information and your impact area and sort of the size of your organization, I can see if I can match you up, maybe make an email connection with someone who is doing that similarly, you know, someplace else. I can certainly tell you about them anecdotally, but that's oftentimes really time-consuming. So that might be the best solution if you're really looking at putting those pieces in place. All right.
Yeah, we've got an interesting question from Julie, who says, starting out with many opportunities over 3 programs seems overwhelming for potential volunteers to decide where to get started. So many of them don't. So she says, how do I encourage them to begin anywhere? So how do you get the feet in the door?
The first thing that I would think about is who is the right person for each of those programs. If you have programs that are where you can see that skill sets or character traits really naturally fit. One of the examples that I use, which is sort of a boiled down example, is the idea of like a front help desk. You're not going to put an introvert who likes to focus on one task at a time at your busy front information desk. So, if you think about who's that right volunteer for each of those programs, for each of those positions, and then when someone comes in, you can ask them, what do you really like to do? How do you like to interact with people? What makes you feel most satisfied when you're doing work? Or what are you hoping to accomplish from volunteering? And then sort of depending upon those answers, you can sort of funnel them in that right direction. So it becomes far less overwhelming to say, oh, well, that's great. You really you like talking to people. You like, being able to solve problems. I've got these two opportunities that I think would be a really good fit for you. Why don't we have you shadow a volunteer for a day doing each of these, and then we can talk about the next steps moving forward. So that you're giving them the opportunity to see what it's like, imagine themselves in it, and it's really changing how you think about, instead of just funneling volunteers into buckets, thinking about where's that match going to happen, where's that work that's going to be meaningful to that volunteer and that's important to your organization so that they're moving your mission forward. And again, if that feels overwhelming, if you have 700 new volunteers coming to you every week, what about a team of, sometimes they're called talent scouts, sometimes you call them, placement counselors, whatever title you want to come up with that fits with your organization, so that that's delegated to a team of volunteers who have the time to have those personal conversations and say, what about this and what about that? If it feels overwhelming for you to do that all by yourself, you don't have to.
We do have another good question from Danielle, who says, have you ever run into cases where volunteers get resentful that they're being asked to do too much and not getting paid? So I started us off by mentioning transparency during orientation and screening, and maybe putting a job description down in writing.
Absolutely.
And managing risk.
Yeah, and I think, again, that culture, you need to screen for that if somebody's coming in. And we certainly wouldn't force a volunteer to become more involved in our organization. The idea is that we're offering them these opportunities, that not everyone necessarily is going to want to be a leader. Not everyone is going to want to change how they engage with your organization, and that's okay. You will still find those volunteers who want to come and just do these specific tasks from now until the end of time because that's who they are. But we can't assume that every volunteer is going to be happy in that situation, and so that's a lot of times why our volunteers leave. So I always say you need to be able to say no, and you need to be able to hear no. So if you've got volunteers who are saying to you, well, I don't know, I kind of like it over here, or I like it the way it is, that's fine. As long as they're not holding your program back, as long as the work that they're still doing is important to your organization, right? We have that balance between meaningful to the volunteer, important to the organization, and as long as that work that's meaningful to the volunteer is still important to your organization, not everybody has to change how they involve themselves in your organization. The idea is that we give the opportunity to those who do want to participate, those who do want to take on a leadership role, those who do want to help us by becoming advocates. The more we invite them in, the more we'll find that the right volunteer sort of naturally fits in with this idea of what we're empowering them to do. But you will always find the ones who want to sit in the back and put files in folders, and God bless them, right? Because we couldn't run our program without them. We just can't assume that everyone wants to put files in folders. All right, well, let's go ahead and end up. And I want to thank everyone for those great comments and questions at the end. I'm going to leave you with some resources, our Learning Center, our help community that you can find by clicking support at the top of any page. I can see questions that have been asked in the past. I think we've previously posted the information about the survey, the study that was done by Jennifer Acker, one of our previous board members. We've got some related webinar topics coming up of engaging volunteers in your volunteer engagement program. So we talk about that a lot. What are the broken down steps to be able to do that? Oh, we just did pro bono and skilled volunteers yesterday, so we won't be doing that one again until the fall. And then managing difficult volunteer transition. The more we change in our organization, the more we have those feelings of people digging in, pushing back, not wanting to change. We also talk about aging volunteers in that session. Find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We have a great blog full of concepts, ideas, all kinds of things that might be of interest to you. You are welcome to contact me directly. Again, if you'd like me to try to find someone who's doing similar work to yours, who's also engaging volunteers in their volunteer engagement program, I'm happy to make those connections. If you are doing that now and you want to be somebody to share that information, please also let me know. So I will do my best to match that up. It may take me a little while, so I'm going to have to go through the Rolodex in my head. All right, thank you everyone so much for all the great participation. We hope to see you on a future webinar, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.